Well, natural science claims that humans have evolved from ape-like ancestors, and they teach this view evangelically, as though it's an established fact. And we need to call these teachings for what they are, the teachings of evolution. These are false teachings that are in direct conflict with the Bible. And they are teachings that they do not have evidence to support, and thus these are lies. These lies are an impediment that prevent people from coming to the faith, and today they are the root cause for the loss of faith that is happening, in particularly amongst young people. Today, any discovery related to human evolution, no matter how insignificant, usually ends up being announced with much fanfare in the popular media. Unfortunately, such reporting is often taken by the populace as an indication that the findings are substantive. And even more troubling, the discoveries frequently make their way into the classroom. The claim may not even be accepted by the scientific community, but the general public and the students who are exposed to these teachings will often remember it for years to come. Note here the matter-of-fact terminology used by Prentice Hall biology when discussing human evolution. Prentice Hall biology is arguably the most widely used biology textbook used in U.S. public schools. They say, humans and other primates evolved from a common ancestor that lived more than 65 million years ago. Between 6 and 7 million years ago, the hominoid line gave rise to a branch that ultimately led to the ancestors and closest relative to modern humans. It's not, these theories of theirs are not taught as theories, subject to revision as they should be, but they're taught as though these things are certainties, that these dates are literally established and set in stone. This accompanying graphic from Prentice Hall biology shows humans placed historically as just the last in a long line of primate animals. See, Darwin's theory led inexorably to this conclusion. His second book, after On the Origin of Species, was titled The Descent of Man, published in 1871. As a result, paleontologists have searched diligently for proof of the existence of ape-men since the late 19th century. But the Bible is clear that God created man. That God created Adam from the dust of the ground in his image. Read here from Genesis 1. Then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. And let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky and over the cattle and over the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Well, however, as due to the false claims of ape-men discoveries and the evangelical way that evolution is taught, many Christians have come to believe these lies. And sadly, in an attempt to reconcile the biblical history with natural history, many are forcing erroneous interpretations into Scripture, undermining the trustworthiness of the text. There are many different theories attempting to reconcile these histories, natural history versus the biblical history. These views are generally called old earth creationism or theistic evolution. And those holding to these views will typically deny major events in the Bible, effectively deleting entire chapters by treating them as non-literal. The creation account, for example, the flood of Noah, some of the major miracles in the Bible, like the parting of the Red Sea or even the Garden of Eden, are denied by those holding to natural history and those holding to theistic evolution. For instance, there are generally two views from theistic evolutionists on Adam. What do you do with Adam? If you accept evolution, if you accept human evolution, then what do you do about Adam? Well, there's two views that are generally held today. One is that God created Adam from an ape-like hominid. Evolution ran its course until the apes had evolved significantly enough, physically and cognitively. Then God got one and plucked one of them and breathed the breath of life into him and plopped him in the Garden of Eden. This is a very common view. But the most common view of theistic evolutionists who want to reconcile evolution with the Bible is that they treat Adam as a non-literal figure. Adam, they believe that Adam was not a real man. The whole story in the Garden of Eden is just an allegorical tale. However, if Adam was not a real man, then at what point does the Bible become historically true? Who was the first real man if Adam is not? See, there's a genealogical record given in Genesis, there's others in Chronicles, and then even Luke, the New Testament author of the book of Luke and Acts, the historian and physician, he gives a genealogy from Jesus all the way back to Adam. In my opinion, these theistic evolutionists do the church great harm by compromising the Word of God with natural history. Jesus, a quote from Isaiah may indeed apply well to Christians who teach others that evolution is true. He said, "This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men." We need to be discerning of false information and weigh all claims of truth against Scripture. Paul said to the Ephesians that, quote, "He, Christ, gave for the equipping of the saints, for the work of service, to the building up of the body of Christ. As a result, we are no longer to be children, tossed here and there by waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, by the craftiness and deceitful scheming." See, we cannot reconcile the Bible with evolution. Evolution is a theory born of atheism and inspired by philosophical naturalism. Atheistic scientists are attempting to explain the origin of our world and ultimately the origin of humanity without God, without a supernatural act of creation. If we want to know the true history of the world, we must trust in the Bible as authoritative and interpret scientific findings ourselves consistent with the biblical worldview. Well, before examining some of the ape-men that paleontologists hold to today, let's first examine the sordid history of past claims. See, a number of ape-men were promoted during the early days when the theory of evolution was struggling to gain acceptance in the public arena. Sadly, many of these now discredited false claims of ape-men caused many people to accept the theory of evolution as an explanation for life on Earth and the origin of humanity. Ernest Haeckel was one. Ernest Haeckel, shown here, was an evangelical promoter of Darwinism in Europe. Darwin believed that Haeckel's enthusiastic propagation of the doctrine of evolution by Haeckel was the chief factor in his theory becoming accepted in Germany and then by extension to Europe. Ian Taylor writes in his book, In the Minds of Men, that Ernst Haeckel became Darwin's chief European apostle, proclaiming the gospel of evolution with evangelistic fervor, not only to the university intelligentsia, but to the common man by popular books, and to the working classes by lectures in rented halls. See, Haeckel was also the first person to draw an evolutionary family tree that included mankind at the top. But to fill in the gap between apes and humans, he invented an ape-man. See, Haeckel believed that the only major difference between apes and the humans was that men could speak and apes could not. Therefore, he postulated a missing link that he called Pithecanthropus allelis, which means speechless ape-man. And he had an artist by the name of Gabriel Max draw the imagined creature, although there was not a scrap of physical evidence to support its existence. A contemporary of Haeckel's by the name of Rudolf Virchow, who was famous as the founder of cellular pathology and for many years was the president of the Berlin Anthropological Society, Virchow was scathing in his criticism of Ernst Haeckel. For Haeckel to have given a scientific name to a creature that had not been proven to exist was to him a great mockery of science. And indeed it was. Let me show you some others. In 1911, the discovery of the ape-man called Piltdown Man was reported by an amateur fossil hunter named Charles Dawson. Dawson claimed to have found pieces of a human skull from a gravel pit in Piltdown, England, and an ape-like lower jawbone with human-like teeth after some additional digging. The two fossils were assigned to the same person who was said to have been at least 500,000 years old. This picture was a publicity photo taken because of the discovery. It was announced that Darwin's missing link had been found. The discovery was published on the front page of the New York Times under the headline, "Darwin's Theory is Proved True." For decades, Piltdown Man reigned supreme in our classrooms, textbooks, museums. Scores of books, pamphlets, and articles were published about Piltdown Man. However, more than 40 years later, in 1953, scientists subjected the find to analysis which proved that the jawbone was of recent origin. The whole thing was a complete fraud. Close inspection revealed file marks on the teeth, which had been shortened to make them appear human-like. In addition, the bones had been treated with chemicals to increase the appearance of their age. It was concluded that the jawbone was a forgery and was later determined to be from an orangutan. Piltdown Man is now recognized to be one of the most spectacular and longest enduring frauds in the history of modern science. Nebraska Man was discovered in western Nebraska in 1922. Media reports flooded classrooms, and it was in fact and was used in school textbooks for several years. And it was even presented as evidence in the Scopes trial. It was the only evidence of human evolution that could be presented at this point in time, so it was presented as evidence in the famous Scopes trial, the propaganda trial that was staged by the ACLU to challenge the teaching of evolution in public schools. Well, what was discovered that led to the reconstruction of Nebraska Man? What was actually discovered? It turns out they did not have a complete skeleton or a complete skull or even a complete jawbone of Nebraska Man. Well, what do they have? Well, all they had was a single molar tooth, shown here. But look at all the detail about Nebraska Man you can get from a single molar tooth. Not only do you know what Nebraska Man looks like, but you even know what his very fetching wife over there on the side looked like as well from that single molar tooth. Well, after further examination, a retraction was published in Scientific American 5 years later. The fossils were found to be from neither an ape nor a man. It turned out that the tooth belonged to a pig. Turned out to belong to a pig. Well, sadly, this type of ape-man misidentification is far from an isolated incident. In 1983, a dolphin rib was also misidentified as a hominid bone. Dr. Tim White, shown here, who's an anthropologist at the University of California, Berkeley, criticizes the claim, calling the fossil Flipperpithecus, after the dolphin show Flipper back in the day. He states this: a 5 million year old piece of bone that was thought to be the collarbone of a human-like creature is actually part of a dolphin rib. The problem, he said, with a lot of anthropologists is that they want so much to find a hominid that any scrap of bone can become a hominid bone. And in fact, ape-men have been attributed to tiny fragments of bone that belong not only to pigs and dolphins, but also alligators and horse and bear and elephant and donkey over the years. Nigel Hawkes, the science correspondent and health editor for the Times newspaper in London, stated in 1994 that few sciences produce such abundant returns from so few fragments of fact as paleontology. That's the science of fossils, right? But it actually wasn't paleontology or fossils that convinced most people that human evolution was true. The theory was ultimately proved true in the minds of many through carefully crafted and misleading illustrations. The March of Progress, as it became known, was published in 1965 in a Time Life book series titled Early Man. It is one of the most famous and recognizable scientific illustrations ever produced, and was the most successful tool used to promote human evolution using the power of visual proof. Using the power of visual proof. It depicted 15 human evolutionary ancestors lined up as if marching in a parade, beginning with proto-apes, then apes, and up to modern humans, showed here in the pre-fold-out version. When folded out, a 5-page poster was displayed. A nationwide mailing of the poster for promotional purposes caused it to receive a much greater viewing than did the book, and it ended up being mounted on the walls of countless classrooms and libraries across the globe. Stephen Jay Gould, who is perhaps the most famous paleontologist of our day, I say this because he was featured on an episode of The Simpsons. You know, that's what, in order to be a famous evolutionist, that's what you have to do today. He described the March of Progress like this. He says, it is the canonical representation of evolution, the one picture immediately grasped and viscerally understood by all. Countless modern reproductions of the graphic have been made and are still in use today, as well as countless parodies. Even Homer Simpson made it into the March of Progress. Homer sapien. Creationists who do not believe their false claims are mocked in a March of Progress, shown here, which is ironic, being that the poster which inspired this insulting piece was knowingly fictitious. Arguably, the March of Progress and its countless reproductions have convinced more people that humans evolved from apes than any physical evidence, but it was egregiously inaccurate. See, evolutionists knew at the time that proto-apes and apes did not walk upright on 2 feet. In fact, these fossil apes were dated long before evolutionists believed that bipedalism had evolved. The author of the book and the poster even states this. Although proto-apes and apes were quadrupedal, all are shown here standing for comparison. But note they're not standing upright, but they're walking with one foot in front of the other. Thus the name March of Progress became known. The fact is that humans are significantly different from apes. Morphologically, apes are quadrupeds, walking on all fours. They're what we call knuckle walkers. Apes are bipeds, walking on 2 feet. The entire skeleton reflects this difference. Humans have a straight S-shaped back that is ideal for upright posture. They have an upright skull. This places the head in the most natural position for looking forward in the upright position. They have fully extendable hips and angled bones. These are ideal for walking upright on 2 legs. And in addition to these, they have fine balance. They have a flat face, so the eyes point forward when walking upright. They have fully extendable knee joints, very long legs. We have arched feet and strong big toes. All of these are necessary and ideal for walking upright. Being that there's such a significant difference between apes and men, it should not be surprising that they have been placed in different taxonomic groups, what we call, these are genera. Using another reproduction of the March of Progress here for illustration, the ape-men are typically placed in either the taxonomic genus Australopithecus, circled for you there, or the genus Homo, circled for you there. Creationists generally regard these genera as representing either true apes or true humans. Homo habilis, I've intentionally overlapped the circles on Homo habilis because Homo habilis is believed to be a mixture of ape and human fossils. The truth is that there's an enormous gap between apes and humans that is simply not supported by fossil evidence. All of the ape-men were created by distorting data or imposing highly speculative assumptions on reconstructions. How did we make the ape-men? They did it in one of these 3 ways. You either combine ape fossils with human fossils and declare the two to be one individual, so it's a real ape-man. Homo habilis was made in this way. Or you emphasize human-like qualities of fossilized apes. And with imagination, you downgrade the apes to be more human-like. Upgrade the apes to be more human-like. Or you emphasize ape-like qualities of fossilized humans. And with some creative imagination, you can downgrade the humans to be more ape-like. All of your ape-men were created in one of these 3 ways. So let's look at these ape-men to see if there's any credibility to these. We're going to first start with the Australopithecines. That's from the genus Australopithecus. Well, the first, and therefore the most famous Australopithecine was called Lucy, Australopithecus afarensis. It was discovered in Ethiopia in 1974. Although the feet, hands, and most of the skull were missing on Lucy, the vast majority of the bones have been found since and give us a much better look at what Australopithecus afarensis actually looked like. Although it was claimed to be a biped, walking on 2 feet, this is far from the truth, as later discoveries have revealed. Models that exaggerate human-like qualities of these fossilized apes can be found in museums and universities around the globe. This is one from the Las Vegas Natural History Museum. Here's another from the Ancestors exhibit at the Maxwell Museum of Anthropology at the University of New Mexico. The Lucy exhibit was even brought to Seattle, was at the Seattle the Pacific Science Center from in 2008 and 2009. This picture actually is a picture that I took of me and one of my classes at Cedar Park Christian Schools who took a field trip there in 2009 to see Lucy, to see the Lucy exhibit. This reproduction is at the Living World exhibit in St. Louis. It was constructed with very human-like hands and feet, along with a very human-like posture, gait, arms and legs. Also notice the very pensive gaze on its face, a very thoughtful expression, apparently pondering its future as a modern human. Well, let's take a look at those very human-like hands and feet. Look at the fingers and toes that are straight, not curved, which is completely wrong. And just the kind of false teachings that convince people that evolution is true. The fact is, prior to the creation of this exhibit, fossils had been found of their hands and feet that showed they were very curved and ape-like and looked nothing like this model. In 1983, Jack Stern and Randall Sussman, a human anatomist at the Stony Brook University School of Medicine in New York, compared the fingers and toes of Australopithecus afarensis to other apes and humans, and published their work in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology. They state this: a summary of the morphological and functional affinities of the hand fossils leads inexorably to an image of a suspensory adapted hand, meaning one for hanging, surprisingly similar to hands found in the small end of the pygmy chimpanzee to common chimpanzee range. Meaning these hands are even more similar to a pygmy chimpanzee than a regular chimpanzee. They continue, there is no evidence that any extant primate had long, curved, heavily muscled hands and feet for any purpose other than to meet the demands of full or part-time arboreal life, living in the trees. These weren't, bipeds, these were quadrupeds that lived in the trees. There are other problems with the claim that afarensis was human-like. The shoulder socket of afarensis is sharply angled. Humans are very vertically oriented, indicating that Lucy lived more of an arboreal lifestyle than ground dwelling. The shoulders are more suited for brachiation, swinging by the arms from branch to branch. In 2000, it was reported that that they also had wrists capable of locking the hands in place as apes do during knuckle walking. They state this: Anamempsis and afarensis, the later represented by the famous skeleton known as Lucy, had wrists capable of locking the hands in place during knuckle walking. They were knuckle walkers. Their pelvic bones were also similar to chimps. Humans have very different pelvic bones that permit us to walk upright. The iliac blade of humans goes front to back, whereas in apes, they flare out laterally. The orientation of these bones is important for maintaining posture while walking upright. Stern and Sussman noted this difference as well. They said the fact that the anterior portion of the iliac blade faces laterally in humans but not in chimpanzees is obvious. The marked resemblance of Lucy to the chimpanzee is equally obvious. It suggests to us that the mechanism of lateral pelvic balance during bipedalism was closer to that in apes than in humans. Well, the skull of Lucy is also extremely ape-like, with the typical sloping face typical of apes, what they call a shovel face. It had a cranial capacity even smaller than a typical ape. Plus, it doesn't have nasal bones that humans possess. The jaw of Australopithecines is much more similar to chimps than humans. The canine teeth come in at an angle, unlike humans, which come in more straight down. Also, the point of attachment of the spine, which in humans is closer to the center, allowing for upright posture. In afarensis, it's further in the back of the skull than it is in chimps. Australopithecines also had the same semicircular canal for balance that apes possess, typical of knuckle walkers, and a large exterior ear hole like apes. The troubling thing is, these ape-like features have been noted by world-renowned scientists for decades. Ashley Montagu is a British and American anthropologist who taught at Harvard, he taught at Princeton, he taught at Rutgers, he taught at the University of California and New York University. He denied that Australopithecine was a human ancestor. He states this: the skull form of all Australopithecines is extremely ape-like. The Australopithecines show too many specialized and ape-like characteristics to be either the direct ancestor of man or of the line that led to man. Lord Zuckerman was a professor of anatomy at Birmingham University, England, and was the chief scientific advisor to the British government. He regarded Australopithecine skull as fully simian. He said this: I find myself totally unpersuaded. Almost always, when I've tried to check the anatomical claims on which the status of Australopithecus is based, I have ended in failure. The Australopithecine skull is in fact so overwhelmingly simian as opposed to human that the contrary proposition could be equated to an assertion that black is white. These things are the complete opposite of humans and completely ape-like. So how did they get an ape-man out of this tiny animal that is so clearly an ape? Well, again, it's not scientific findings that has convinced most people that evolution is true, but rather through teachings and illustrations that are outright distortions of the truth. They make diagrams and models that are either speculative or knowingly distorted to project their views of evolution onto the find. Note, for example, this reconstruction published in National Geographic in 1996. It has several human-like qualities that were added, including whites in their eyes. See, no apes have white in their eyes. It is a distinctively human trait. The sculptor even admits this. He says, I wanted to get a human soul into this ape-like face to indicate something about where she was headed. See, it's not an honest reproduction. They've added their evolutionary assumptions into the reproduction and made it closer to where they think it was headed than where it actually was at this point in time. It's a clear distortion of the true find. Unfortunately, such reconstructions that contain distorted and imaginary speculations are all too common in paleoanthropology and have been very effective in convincing people that ape-men are real. The truth is, Australopithecines have many characteristics shared with chimpanzees and almost none shared with humans. A sentiment that is well expressed by Charles Oxnard, who is arguably the world's foremost expert on computerized analysis of bones using digital X-rays and 3D rendering. He was formerly a professor of anatomy and anthropology at the University of Chicago and is currently at the University of Western Australia. He said this: the Australopithecines are now irrevocably removed from a place in the evolution of human bipedalism, possibly from a place in a group any closer to humans than to African apes, and certainly from any place in the direct human lineage. Personally, however, I think Dr. Oxnard's views are a bit naive. See, an evolutionary theory will never be abandoned and its evidence removed until something better is found to take its place. Therefore, despite the enormous problems with Australopithecines being a human an ape-man, they will remain as the leading transition between apes and humans until something else is discovered to take its place. Mark my words.